You know, of all the topics that I have covered in this series, there's a reason why I kept this one towards the end. And it's because of all of these topics we've covered, all the different ways that we need to be careful in our spiritual walks. This is the one that I think I wrestle with personally the most. Time. Because I feel like we go through the course of a day and we really struggle to get all the things done that we want to get done. But I think there's some things we can learn as we look at this topic a little bit today. You know, there are a lot of things in life that are not the same for everybody. But one of the things that is absolutely 100% the same for everybody is that we are given 24 hours every day. Now, some of us do more with those 24 hours than others. And some of us are blessed with more 24 hours than others. But in the course of a day, we're all given 24 hours. Which got me to thinking one day, what if we looked at a day as a microcosm for an entire lifetime? Basically rolled up an entire lifetime into one 24-hour day. What would that look like? So I'm going to start this morning with a 24-hour clock. This is not a 12-hour clock. And let's assume that we spend at least 6 hours a day sleeping. So that would start us with this little exercise at 0600. So you get started in the morning. You wake up, new day begins. It's a little bit like the arrival of a new baby, right? Takes a little while to get started. Most of our focus is around getting cleaned up, getting fed, getting going. We start slow, but we pick up steam and off we go. And once we start, it's here we go, full speed ahead. Then we have a period where we're basically just learning the basics. We wake up in the morning and we check to see what happened overnight. We check the news, we check the markets, we check the weather. We deal with the commute, we plan a little bit. And it's a little bit like our early days growing up. We're getting some basics, and we do this in our elementary, intermediate, and junior high schools. Then we finally get to work. The day's about to begin. The caffeine is starting to kick in. We really don't know what we don't know, but we're still pretty energetic, feel pretty good in the morning. It's a little bit like when we graduate from high school, right? We come out of high school thinking we know everything, but we really don't. The day is just getting started. And by mid-morning, new information begins to roll in. We're starting to make some adjustments. We pick up the pace in some areas. We slow down in some areas. We adjust in some areas. You know, I thought I was ready before, but now I am certain that I'm ready. I've got a little more information. I'm ready to take on the world. Then I get around midday. Time to grab some lunch, re-energize, reassess. And it's similar to those first 2 to 3 years out of college or in the new profession you're in. You have enough time to gauge whether this is something I want to do for an extended period, or if it's not something I want to do. I have a pretty good idea, and I need to maybe make a change in another direction. Do I press forward? Do I keep going? Now, lunch is over. Takes us into that 1 to 3 p.m. time frame. I'm re-energized from the lunch. I'm ready to hit prime time. I realize half the day is behind me. I've only got a few more hours left to get things done in the day I need to get done. So this is typically where the heavy lifting takes place. In our life cycle, this is where we're building a career and starting families. As the day goes on, I start to wear down a little bit, but I keep plugging along because I'm looking forward to the end of the workday. And finally, I get to the end of the workday. We reach that 5 or 6 p.m., time to head home. I've been looking forward to this time of day ever since I began the day, right? I'm not there yet, but I'm so close that I'm getting a new buzz of energy, some anticipation as to what might be ahead. And then I get to this part. I've made it to the end of the workday. I get home, I can now spend time doing things I want to do. I can spend time with the kids. I can relax a little bit. I can work in the yard. I can maybe take a run, hit some golf balls. Still busy, but I'm busy doing things that I want to do. But now it's time for bed, right? The evening wears on. We're starting to get a little sleepy and tired. Bedtime is quickly approaching. Seemed like it took forever to get from 8 to 5, but that 5 to 10 just flew by, went by very quickly. Time for rest, time for sleep. Now, in our earthly life, Lord willing, we're going to arise after a restful sleep and begin the new day, the next day, all over, and the cycle repeats. The sleep is often a euphemism in the Bible for death. When our life ends, we're put to rest. I can see some of you, the wheels are turning. You're looking at the clock saying, where exactly on this clock am I today? When you look at time in this perspective, it hits a little different. We get so caught up in the busyness of the day, we're just thinking about all the time that's ahead of us, and we're not thinking about all the time behind me that I let kind of slip through my hands a little bit, right? So maybe I do need to be a little more careful in how I spend my time. Which brings me to these words from Paul. This is why it is said, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Be very careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil." We tend to shy away from talking about death, but we are closer to it today than we were yesterday. We're closer to it right now than we were this morning. But for the Christian, that new chapter is going to be glorious. That is a rise and shine we all want to hear. But for the unrighteous, the unbelieving, those that have fallen away, maybe it's time to come home. But it's always time for all of us to recognize that that 60, 70, 80 years of life really is going by very quickly. And some of you are probably thinking right now, I didn't come to Bible class to be told I'm not as young as I used to be. And I get that. But I think we need to be a little bit careful here because I think time is one of those areas that Satan does his best work, right? Go out and sow your seeds today. You can worry about getting things right tomorrow. But at some point, tomorrow may not come. Do any of these statements ring a bell with anybody in here besides me? I can't get everything done in a day. I am so busy, I can't even take a break. I would love to go with you, I just don't have time. With so many things to do, I don't know what to tackle next. When I take a day off, time flies by and it's just wasted. I don't even have time to take a vacation. If I do take a vacation, I come back more pressed, rushed, and stressed than I did before I went to take vacation. Our lives are ruled by time. We have alarm clocks, digital timers on computers, watches, iPhones, clocks on microwaves, appliances, automobiles. I counted 21 visible clocks in my own home, constantly reminding me what time it is. And it's not just the clocks, it's our vocabulary too, right? Fast, slow, late, early, prompt, tardy, in a minute, in an hour, in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. You just slow down and say, man, I just don't have time to get everything done, or so it seems. But I go look at the U.S. Department of Labor statistics. These were released in June of 23. They do this every year. These are looking at the latest one, which was the Time survey of 2022. This is a survey of men and women, American men and women, over the ages of 15, and the size of this survey is about 8,000. And I didn't put it on here because I didn't want to make this any smaller than I did, but both of those columns for men and women add up to 24 hours. And some of you that are bosses and managers in your work are probably looking at this and say, I knew it. I'm not getting a full 8 hours a day out of my staff. And you were right. Almost 80% of our day is spent in 3 areas: sleeping, leisure activities, and work. A third of our day is spent sleeping. A third of our day is spent on eating, personal grooming, and leisure activities. And we often joke about babies only eating, sleeping, and you know what else. But you look at this and say, well, maybe the joke is on us. You know, I look at this list some more, and I look at the things on this list that I think most of us don't enjoy doing. Work we don't really want to do. Housework we don't really want to do. The caring for others. Remember, we're in a me society. Education. I love school. It was the studying that I didn't care for. But you add all those up, and it comes to 6.48 hours per day. Interestingly, it comes up to 6.48 for both men and women. And that's roughly 27% of the day. That means 73% of the day is doing things that I generally enjoy and want to do. So something's not adding up here. I don't feel there's enough time in the day to get everything done, but it appears that I have more free time to do things I want to do than mankind has ever had. So maybe there's something else at play here. Maybe there's some daily clutter that I need to be paying attention to. And you think about it, for most of our society, men and women have spent most of the day, or most of their days, looking for food, looking for clothing, trying to shelter and survive. Securing food is no longer an issue for us, really. Having a place to shelter is not a problem for most. We can travel anywhere in the world in a matter of hours. And not only air travel, but we can get anywhere locally, really in a matter of minutes. Most of us have not only one car, we have multiple cars. And even if we don't have a car, we have access to modes of transportation that are easy and affordable. We have supermarkets, microwaves, stoves, refrigerators, freezers, washers and dryers, dishwashers, internet, etc. All marvelous innovations that do what? Save us time. If I sit at a stoplight more than 5 minutes, I'm complaining. If I have to wait in the fast food line more than 5 minutes, I'm complaining. As we discussed last week, if you give me 5 minutes and a Wi-Fi connection, I can get access to really more information that I can even process. And while I sometimes don't view all of these technological advancements as all that helpful to me, evidently they are helpful to me. I have lots more free time. I can't get everything done, but I actually have more time than mankind has ever had before. So what is going on here? So it's not surprising that the scriptures address cautions about using our times wisely in many ways. One of them is here in Ecclesiastes. For everything there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And I didn't list them here, but this is the one that talks about a time to die, a time to be born, a time to plant, a time to harvest, time to weep, laugh, speak, keep silent. In short, what it's telling us is we can't control time, but we do control how we use our time. Ephesians 5:15 and 16 says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of time because the days are evil. This is right after the rise and shine verse. Paul cautions us about using time wisely. And then James 4:14, we're all familiar with this. James reminds us that our time on earth is ever so short. And in the context of eternity, even a mist or vapor is too long, right? So before moving on, I'd like to generalize about some time. One, We can't control it, but we can choose how we use it. Time is perishable and irreplaceable. We sometimes don't think of time as a precious resource, but it really is. Our time truly is a vapor or mist in the context of eternity. And those of us in this classroom that are older, our view of this little verse here has changed probably since we were in our 20s. Money you can save, time you can't. It doesn't wait. You can't place it on hold. You can't save it for a rainy day. We will be called one day to account for how we used our time. I think there's enough here to say we need to be careful with how we use our time. So where do I go to learn some truths about how best to keep my time? And so I'm going to spend the rest of the class period today looking at someone who is probably the best manager of time that I know of. And that's Jesus. Jesus began his ministry roughly at 30 years of age, Luke 3 tells us. Depending on which feast he attended, you can make a case that his ministry went anywhere from 3 to 3.5 years. So for someone like me who has a hard time getting things done in a day, I can learn something from someone who did a lifetime of work in 3 to 3.5 years. And before I get into these, let me just say these are just a few. There are many others out there. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, this class, one of the advantages you have as being the teacher is you can point a lot of the things at you. These are things I need to hear. But I'm sharing them because there may be some things here that are useful to you as well. And the first thing I would say about managing our time, it's important to know the mission and stay on track. This is probably the easiest and the most obvious. Is there really any doubt what Jesus' mission was? It's clear. And he never wavered in his focus. Even at a young age, Jesus knew that he was about his Father's business, we read in Luke 2:49. And even in his last days, Jesus resolutely opted out of Jerusalem knowing that he was going to be killed. We read about that in Luke 9:51. Along the way, he ate with sinners. He sought out to save people who were lost. He selected common men as followers. He didn't avoid people because they were sinners. Matthew 6:33 says, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And if you want to boil down this busyness into one phrase and how to address it, this is it. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And I suggest we already all know this. But in the busyness of the world, our blind pursuits, we sometimes lose sight. John 9. We must work the works of him who sent me while his day, night is coming, when no one can work. Jesus says, I must work the works of him who sent me. That's a message for us. We need to work the works of him who sent us. And be careful, because once night falls, this physical life is going to come to a close. Once you're clear on your mission and your purpose, the next step is identifying and staying focused on your priorities. First part of that is, do we know our priorities? And the second part is, do we spend our day focused on those priorities? Do you go into your day with a list of priorities you need to accomplish in the day? And then do you stay on track with your priorities? Many of you probably have heard of the 80-20 rule, right? A statistical theory made popular by an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto, the Pareto charts guy. In short, the theory is that most of the results of any situation are determined by a small number of causes. Examples: 80% of the sales come from 20% of the customers. 80% of your monthly bills come from 20% of your ongoing expenses. Mortgage payment, car payment, tuition, examples. Or if you are a business owner or manager, 80% of the work accomplished by your staff is being done by 20% of the staff. So applying this 80-20 rule here to our time, what it's saying is that 80% of our time is consumed by 20% of the things we do. So using simple math, if you began the day with 10 things to do, 2 of the things on your list would consume about 80% of the time, and the other 8 items share the remaining 20%. So the big question is, are your top priorities, the important things, getting your 80%, or are they getting your 20%? And if you go back to the U.S. Department of Labor statistics that I showed you earlier, the 80-20 rule held true there as well. The top 3 items, and there were 12 that I had listed, accounted for almost 80% of the time: sleep, recreation, and work. So where does prayer time, reading and studying the Bible, doing the things that God has called us to do, fall in our list of priorities? And Jesus told us this anyway, didn't he? He told us this in Matthew 6:21. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Is spending time with God and doing the things he's called us to do part of our 80%, or is it getting squeezed in the 20%? No one can serve 2 masters. Either you'll hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. And while this verse is cautioning us about putting our pursuit in wealth, it's really cautioning us about putting our pursuit in any activity as a life priority. So could my daily time crunch really just be the fact that I don't know clearly what my priorities are, and I'm not staying fixed on my priorities? And here's one of those verses of conscience that I've referred to throughout this series. Luke 14. A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is ready." But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, "I've just bought a field. I got to go see it." The second said, "I have bought 5 yoke of oxen. I'm on my way to try them out." And the last one said, "I just got married. I can't come." Is it possible that the message here is that our pursuit of possessions, career, and family are taking over the time that we should be spent pursuing God and what he tells us to do? Be careful how we use our time. And how about this one? Failing to plan, planning to fail. Some of you have probably heard this saying before. I'm not sure originally who coined this phrase. Some point to Benjamin Franklin. Others have said something similar, so it could be somebody else. But how did Jesus feel about planning? And I don't have them on the screen, but there are other examples. How about Matthew 7:24-27, about the man that built his house on the rock and was not washed away by rains, which is talking about planning ahead and building your life on the right foundation? Or Matthew 25:1-13, the parable of the 13 virgins who were not ready. The parable was they were not ready when Christ would return. And this ideal of planning, I think, is really important to us, because when we don't plan, all those little things in the course of the day that we really like to do jump up and start consuming our time. So we've got to identify and stay focused on what is important. We've got to avoid filling every single minute of every single day with non-essential tasks. And we need to help ourselves stay on track with our mission. Could this possibly be one of the things that's making us feel like we don't have enough time in the day to get things done that we need to get done? Prayer time, Bible reading and meditation, teaching our children, helping others, sharing the gospel. Or how about this one? Do you ever feel like in the course of your day you're just jumping from fire drill to fire drill? It's one crisis after the next. If that's the case, one of the things we may be dealing with is trying to distinguish between what is urgent from what is important. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Stephen Covey, the management self-help guy, who wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In his book, he talked about a decision matrix that was used by Dwight D. Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, who used his matrix to separate important from urgent. And I'm going to borrow a few things from his book, second, to help frame this thought a bit. But these are the things that are urgent, right? These are things that have to be done immediately. They can't wait. I got to drop everything I'm doing and get these done, which immediately kicks us into a reactive mode. We drop everything to get them done. And our moods tend to be, we're quick-tempered, we're defensive, we're critical, we're rushed, and we're short-sighted. Anybody ever been there? On the flip side, important, these are things that are part of our long-term mission. We identify these items early on. We usually plan and work towards them. They put us in a responsive mode. They're well thought out. They're carefully planned. Our mood generally is we're calm, we're thoughtful, we're rational, relaxed, and we're open to new opportunities. And, I think every one of us would agree we want to remain in an important frame of mind, keep things, the important, up front. But it's hard to not be sucked into this vortex of all the urgent, right? Particularly in our 24/7 breaking news world. We're constantly bombarded with rush. You got to do this. You got to do this now. It's me too, must have, instant gratification, breaking news. But you ask the question, can something be both urgent and important? Well, it's possible, but it's not often, especially with proper planning. More often than not, tasks start out as minor or uneventful. They get put off, forgotten, not addressed timely, and suddenly we have an emergency. For instance, we wake up the day with 1,000 things to do. And then we just remembered, I forgot about my doctor's appointment. And I just remembered that my child has a science project due tomorrow. And now all of a sudden, my lack of planning has created an urgent emergency. So I'm back to square one, back to the previous slide of not planning that allows the fun but unimportant things to take over my time, which goes back to not knowing our priorities and our mission. So you can see the vicious cycle that takes place. Now you can ask, did Jesus ever deal with separating urgent from important? Well, here's a couple of examples I found. One of them is the story of Lazarus in chapter 11. The text tells us that Mary and Martha had alerted Jesus that their brother Lazarus was dying and ill, and would he come? And Jesus said he would come, but he didn't come for 2 days. He didn't drop everything he was doing and run to Lazarus. I didn't list the whole story here, but we know the outcome. He finally made it to Lazarus and called him back to life. How about Luke 8, story of Jairus' sick and dying daughter? Again, I didn't list the entire text here, but when Jesus heard about his daughter, he left. He didn't run, he didn't panic. And remember what happened along the way. He encountered a big crowd, and the big crowd gathered around him, and there was a lady in the crowd that needed his help. And he didn't say, I'm too busy, I'll have to get to you later. He stopped and he helped. Were these incidents important, needed attention? Absolutely. Were they urgent? No. Was he in a panic? Did he sprint to the emergency? Was he defensive and irrational? No. In one case, he waited 2 days before seeing the Lazarus, and the other, he stopped and helped a bleeding lady with needs. Now, I know we sometimes say, well, Jesus had healing power and foresight knowledge that we don't have. He knew the outcome. He didn't need to rush. And that's possible. But I think more likely it's that Jesus did know the difference between important and urgent. He didn't allow the me too, must have now, instant gratification, breaking news world define for him what was important versus urgent. And we also see this in Jesus, even in this story here. Going back to the story of regarding Jairus' daughter, we see not one but two interruptions. And then we read this one in Matthew 19. This is where the disciples were complaining to Jesus about the parents interrupting him and bringing their kids to him. And Jesus' reaction was, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for to such belong the kingdom of heaven." So how do we feel about interruptions? It often depends on what we're doing at the time of the interruption, right? Or who is doing the interruption. How did Jesus feel about interruptions? Well, from the scriptures, it doesn't appear that it bothered him too much. In fact, it seemed to me that he almost welcomed interruptions. So why would someone ever welcome interruptions? Because it fit his mission. It gave him another opportunity to serve, to teach, to encourage, and to heal. And I think there's a pretty good lesson in that for us as we go into this new week. You never know what interruption happens in this coming week that may change someone's life, including our own. Now, another element of time we sometimes wrestle with is, what do we do when things get really hectic? You got the story here about Jesus staying calm in the midst of chaos. On a boat, waves breaking above the boat. In Luke's account, it says swamped and in great danger. And what was Jesus doing in all this? He was asleep on a cushion. After all, this was Jesus. But this was Jesus in human form. Same Jesus that got hungry and got thirsty. You know, we sometimes seem to think that the storm has to be still for us to be calm and quiet. But I think Jesus is pointing out here that we can be calm and quiet even in the midst of chaos. And there are a number of examples where Jesus remained calm into what to us would have been a chaotic and frenzied setting. Feeding the 5,000. That had to be a real chaotic setting. His arrest and capture prior to crucifixion, John 18. Or maybe the angry crowd at Mount Precipice. He seemed calm in all of that. And why is it important for us to not let chaos manage us? Well, our rational, cool, calm, and collected thinking becomes replaced with our urgent, short-sighted, fight-or-flight response, and often leads to consequential actions. So know your mission, have a plan, stick to the plan, and be quiet and calm even in the midst of turmoil. That's what Jesus did. And in all that, we have to keep this in mind too. If we don't rest and recharge, our bodies are going to feel the effects of that, right? We lose cognitive skills. We suffer memory loss. We find it hard to concentrate. Our mood swings. Appetite skyrockets. Metabolism slows. Immune system weakens. We need to slow down sometimes and recharge and rest, and Jesus knew this. Jesus had just sent 12 disciples out to do ministry work. When they came back, what did he say? He encouraged them to separate from the people and rest. And I didn't just put them all on the slide, but there are other instances. Matthew 14, 1 through 13. Right after Jesus was told that Herod the Baptist had been beheaded, he needed time to be alone. Then in Luke 5, 12 through 16, and Luke 6 through 12, two more instances where Jesus withdrew to be alone and to pray. And we know that Jesus often retreated and prayed before big decisions and big events. So an important part of us managing our time is take time to recharge, retreat, rest, and be alone. Now, I think one of the things that's interesting in this to me is that when Jesus wanted time to recharge and re-energize, he often withdrew and prayed, and sometimes for extended periods. When we try to recharge and re-energize, what do? We go check email. We go spend money. We go get on social media. So in other words, we do things that add stress, not reduce stress. So I know I went through that fairly quickly because I had a lot of material to cover today, so I'm going to summarize it all one more time. As we wrap up this series, as we wrap up this class, I think all of us need to be careful to how we manage our time every day. I know I do. One of the ways we can reset: know the mission and stay on task. We have to identify and stay focused on our priorities, not let the little priorities overrule everything. We've got to plan a little bit so that all those little fun things that come into play don't rule our day. I mean, I don't know about everybody, but as I'm sitting down and I have a list of things to do, I have the things I got to get done and the things I want to do. And if I don't prioritize the two, where do I go? I go do the things I want to do. Right? We've got to learn to distinguish the important from the urgent. Not everything that comes along is absolutely have to be dealt with right now. But by the same token, we do need to plan ahead so that it doesn't become an emergency. We have to stay calm and manage the chaos that's inevitably going to come at times. We've got to regularly rest, retreat, and recharge so we're not generating more stress because our body's down and run down, our attitude is not what it needs to be. So I'd say there are some adjustments for me that I need to make, and maybe there are a few up here for you too. But folks, that's really all I've got today. I've got a couple of questions. Okay, Travis. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yep, and all that you said, that's exactly why I put this clock up at the very beginning of the class and went through it, because sometimes I think in our busyness of the day, we don't stop to realize how full the beaker is actually starting to get to.